From Brazil to the world, this is Profit Talks, a podcast produced by Hayek Global College and dedicated to exploring how you can ethically maximize profits. For more episodes, please visit hayekcollege.com/profit. Hello, everybody. This is Edson from Profit Talks, and we have here in our first guest our one and only Burke Files. How are you doing, Burke?
I'm doing very good. The one and only. I like that.
You like that? Yes. Burke is one of the world's leading experts on due diligence and corporate fraud investigations. He's a highly sought out international speaker and author of several books, including Due Diligence for the Financial Professional. And we're very honored to have you here, Burke.
Thank you.
And so just tell us a little more about what you do and what is corporate fraud investigation.
Well, it's not just corporate fraud. It's investment fraud, hedge funds, a decent Ponzi scheme. And what is a fraud investigator? I mean, how do we make an analogy? A little bit like an accident reconstructionist after the cars have crashed. What happened? What happens when there's a surprise? If the surprise is delightful, well, then it's enchanting. If the surprise is not delightful, well, it's horrid. It's a fraud. And the point here is it's a surprise. And if you haven't planned, you haven't done your homework, you haven't done your investigation, you've made lots of assumptions along the way, that's how you end up with the surprise, either good or bad. Fraud is the taking of something without someone's permission. Theft is when robbery is when someone comes up to you and sticks a gun in your face or beats you up. Fraud is when they smile at you and they say you're a wonderful person and they give you money, and of course you've lied the entire time. Fraud is about deception. What does a fraud investigator do? He works backwards to find out, really following three parallel paths. What was the lie? What was the loss? And what is the law?
Yeah.
Lie, loss, law. And you put those three together to see if you can form a recovery. Believe it or not, fraudsters don't buy annuities. Lamborghinis, Ferraris, yes, but not annuities. Mm-hmm. So now you have to figure out what happened. Let's say they have defrauded a company out of $30 million. Okay, what was their lifestyle like? They were burning $2 million a year. The fraud lasted 3 years. That's $6 million. So now you're looking at a recovery of maybe $24 million in assets. Mm-hmm. So you begin your investigation to find those assets beforehand. And this is very important. Any asset recovery having to do with fraud for any reason is you do an investigation beforehand to find those assets. Some people call it a sub rosa, someone call it a secret investigation. I don't care, as long as the other side doesn't know what you're doing. That's important. And what you want to do is you want to find good counsel that understands that you have to freeze the assets before you litigate. Suing, getting a judgment, and then trying to collect on the judgment is not going to work with these people. They're going to have a fully funded defense with your money. So you want to make sure that they don't have access to that money to fund the defense, because that's also the money that you're going to try to recover. Now, that doesn't mean you go out there of the 26 million the 24 million that's out there, that you get it. You just freeze it, so you make sure that they can't access it, and that those assets are available to you after litigation and a judgment to garnish and to convert back into assets for your client. The old method of suing, getting a judgment, and collecting is an anachronism. It just doesn't work. It's one way for the lawyers to get rich and the victims to be victimized a second time.
You said something interesting there, where the person doing the fraud doesn't necessarily have a face. It could be any person, anywhere. And when we think about the fairy tales about the bad guy, what I'm trying to say is I had a case in my family's business where we we really loved the accountant that we had, but we didn't really understand if he was doing the right accounting or not. But he was very efficient in helping out in any sorts of stuff outside of the business, even outside of his accountant role. And then we later found out that he was frauding the whole thing and he was stealing money from the company. And it was a pretty interesting experience that we went through, in the sense that we discovered that a person that we liked, and he was actually very efficient and got a lot of stuff done. He was very pleasant to work with, and he was very good in the interpersonal relationships. But in the end, he was stealing money from us.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on that? Is there a typical stereotype, or at least something we can look at when we look for someone that's frauding in any setting?
Sure. You've just described one of the personality types. They're absolutely charming. Why else would you open your checkbook or not pay attention if they weren't charming? If they were behaving like an annoying relative, you'd check everything they did. But that's part of it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Charming. They appear to be diligent. They appear to be involved in all aspects of the business because they want to know very closely. They want to know what you're doing every hour of every day. So in case you start sniffing on their trail, they can misdirect you. Many years ago, I was invited by a professional practice management group. They managed large doctor offices. And they said, gee, we have a practice that's making its numbers, but boy, the expenses are out of whack. Can you help us? We're suspicious. I said, fine. When does your practice close? They said 6 p.m. I said, okay, I'll be there at 7 p.m. He said, oh, our bookkeeper will be here for you. She hasn't taken a vacation in 3 years. I said, under no circumstances should you tell her I'm coming, and she should not be there. By 11, I documented almost $500,000 in fraud. It was
Wow.
4 hours. It took a couple more days, and we were up to about 800,000. And the medical practice didn't survive. They were devastated, just like you were. That this is a person who was in our practice that we cared for, that we worried about, and she was always there for us. It's like, yeah.
And we were actually
kind of
considering
like a parasite,
it.
always there for you.
Yes.
It's funny, as many years later, I was at a friend's Christmas party in the old part of town, and he had a marvelous margarita machine in his backyard. You just pull the handle, and the margarita goes into the big glass. Uh-huh. And I had just had one of those, and I was chatting with some friends, and they said, hi, Mr. Files, good to see you, Burke. And this woman pivots and goes, are you Burke Files? I go, yes, I am. And the margarita glass came at my head. Cat-like reflexes, it passes me and crashes against the side of the house.
Wow.
And my wife, always being kind, she looks over at me, she goes, an ex-girlfriend? I have no idea who she is. And it took me a little while to find out, this was on holiday mode. And it turned out it was that woman from the medical practice. She just got out of jail.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, making friends. The idea behind due diligence is to do your homework before the fraud. It's to understand, to make your business not fraud-proof. There's no such thing as fraud-proof, but to make it fraud-resistant. For example, it is law here in the United States that bank officers take at least 3 weeks vacation a year, 2 of those weeks concurrent. Why is that? That means someone has to step in, take over their duties, and if they take over their duties, they'll be able to find out, most frauds will reveal themselves when you take over someone's duties. So that's a way to make a business fraud resistant, is to require people to leave, to take vacation, especially in control positions.
Mm-hmm. Why is
Second,
that? Why would you want to? So if a person is, I don't know, in charge of the treasury of the company, right? He's the one that puts all the accounts that are going to be payable inside the bank, and then he was the one that releases the money in the bank. Why do you want that person to take the vacation?
well, you've described another problem, but we'll get to that in just a second. You want
Okay.
to have them take a vacation because most frauds require some type of upkeep, whether it's a short-term skim, ghost suppliers, ghost employees, fake invoicing. All of these things require some type of maintenance to juggle the books so that
Okay.
they appear even. There are typically three functions within a business when it comes to money going out. In a request, a purchase order, someone writing the check or sending the payment, and a third person reconciling what's been received against the purchase order.
Okay.
And I'll bet you that that person in your family business did all three things for you.
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh. The woman at the woman at the medical practice did all three things for the doctors. And if you're going to have a fraud, that's a bit like having the fox guard the hen house and also write their own performance appraisals is unwise. Only 2 chickens gone today. Good ones. So you've got to separate tasks, especially those tasks that are so vital to a business.
Yes.
Even in the hedge fund industry, you take a look at most hedge funds, and while you have a fund manager, you'll also have a custodian and an administrator that are different. And why is that? Well, you want to have the three parts of making the investment decision, orchestrating the trades and payments and the rest, and then another party who's the custodian who holds the assets.
Yeah.
Without that division of tasks, it becomes much more likely that someone will look at the large kitty of money and think some of that belongs in my pocket.
Yes. Yes. No, that's a very important insight. I believe the term that I had in mind was segregation of duties,
Exactly the correct term.
or we can even think about this in government, right? When you think about the separation of powers, where you have the person who legislates in one side, one that judges in the other, and one that executes. So you have the three powers. On the company, you also have to have that type of segregation. I just wanted to go again to mention for you to mention again what were these segregation of duties, the most important ones in the company, because that's a really important insight that I wish my listeners would really appreciate. So what would you say for like companies in general, right? Let's think about the family business, any business owner out there that what are the main duties that you need to segregate? How many are there, and how would you segregate them? The biggest ones, right?
The biggest ones. Well, first of all, look at your business and where are your biggest risks. And that's where you want to begin the segregation of duties. Being defrauded is one of your biggest risks, other than operational risks. So you want to make sure that you segregate the duties between requesting, purchasing, and reconciliation. Another, in any type of manufacturing business, you want to physically divide shipping and receiving. Physically divide. I've even seen this done in print shops where people were stealing literally pallets full of paper because shipping and receiving weren't divided. Mm-hmm. Finally, the printing plant had interior fence put up, and one was receiving, where the goods came in. The receiving goods went into inventory, and after they had been printed, they were put in shipping. This way, a pallet of paper couldn't accidentally slide over to shipping, disappear out in someone's truck. I saw this with a watchmaker. I was brought over to Switzerland to figure out why this watchmaker was missing watches, and there were several attempts to defraud the watch company millions of dollars at a couple of different times, but they had been caught. But they were missing 75 watches. What had happened is the watch company had grown, and had grown from a few hundred people to over 200 in an 8 or 9 year time period. One of the few physical watch companies to grow. Beautiful watches, completely out of my budget.
Mm-hmm.
And the people really loved the owners, really loved the family. And what had happened is someone impersonating the owner had called up and required that a wire be sent and faxed over the instructions. Thankfully, the wire had a correspondent bank, and we stopped the outgoing wire at the correspondent bank and got the money returned. But they had in place that no wire can go out over 100,000 Swiss francs unless the owner approves it. And he was on vacation, and it was for the equivalent of about 340,000 Swiss francs. Both the banker and the treasury person were trying to figure out how to do it, and do it in 3 wires for 100,000 Swiss francs, or 4 wires for 100,000 Swiss francs each, so that they were compliant. I said, guys, you missed the point. that barrier was there to stop exactly this. And their error wasn't one of fraud. Their error was one of wanting to please someone that they liked very much. Mm-hmm. A big accounting firm had done a report for them that was about that thick on how to put in controls and all sorts of other things. And of course, the owner's not going to implement that. It's just that ended up in the wastebasket. And we put in place something very simple called a second cell phone. No one knew the number to it except for 5 people, and he always had it on him. And there was always a password. So they'd call him and say, sir, we have this following request for a wire, or this request for a shipment, et cetera, et cetera. Is it okay or not? And he'd say yes or no and give the password. There you've cut out so many opportunities for fraud. And it's something simple, because whatever plan you put in place has to be appropriate to both the business, the industry, and the person. You can put a suit coat on someone and it feels like a bag, or a suit coat on someone and it's like a straitjacket. That's very important, is background checks before you hire. And I want to emphasize real background checks, not the crap you find online for $25, $50, $70. Cheap and cheerful is never either. And what's amazing is the people in the C-suite, the executive suite, actually receive less scrutiny than new hires. Like the CEO of Yahoo, Scott Thompson, who didn't have one of the degrees he purported. A gentleman was taking over for a large retailer in Australia and Southeast Asia, saying that he had the same role in Zara, and it was a big news event. And Zara called the new company and said, we have no idea who he is. And yet the recruiter said, well, we did a background on him. No, you didn't. You did crap. The second thing is follow-up background checks after someone is hired. Every, say, 3 years, 2 to 3 years, or anytime they receive a promotion. If they're in a critical function, such as treasury or safety or compliance, that should be updated. That background check should be updated each year. Why do I say this? It's a bit like a seat belt. I hope you never need it.
Yeah.
But when you need it, there's nothing like it. A large family of hedge funds out of New York had a director, a very common name. And there was a person with that very common name in the same city that had 2 federal lawsuits against him for running Ponzi schemes. One was for 20 million, the other one was for 50 million. Oh. I called up the fund and they said, is just your Tom somebody's, Tom Jones, whatever his name was. They said, we can't tell you. I said, you're a public company. I'm sorry, sir, that's private information. I said, but you're a public company. That got me nowhere. It's over the phone. They can just hang up on you. And they did. So I sent a FedEx envelope being an investigator, you can find the director's home addresses, FedEx envelope, and sent the FedEx with a question in there and copies of the lawsuit to all of the directors. Is this person the same person on your board? I never got a response, but I did see something in the public filings, it's called an 8K, where Mr. Tom resigned because of family reasons. Here you have a director of a major fund running two different Ponzi schemes.
Wow.
He had been embroiled in litigation for over 18 months. This is bad stuff. People have problems. You know, someone who is a good, sound individual, something may happen in their lives and they go off the rails. Maybe they were just good interviewers and you don't realize that they're a criminal.
Yes. And interesting fact, the guy who stole money from our company got a job like a year later. So if the people who hired him would simply give us a call, they would have avoided a big problem from the other company, because hell knows what he's doing at this other company now.
You know, you try to get people to act like adults, but sometimes it just doesn't work. Over here, at least I said, in the U.S., everyone's so worried about liability, they won't verify. They'll just verify dates of employment. And my favorite question is afterwards. So he came, you know, August '86 to October 2019. Is he eligible for rehire? Yes or no? And you'll hear usually a laugh on the other side of the line. Yes, he is. Or no. Don't have to ask anymore.
And you talked two interesting points here. I'm going to go back and explore a little bit.
Sure.
When we think about recruiting people, well, the message that we hear from the people management gurus and like how we come about hiring people, we always look for the culture and how these people match and how their competencies, if they're motivated or not. But we rarely talk about really the background checks of the hiring process. And you also talked about how we should have a routine, right, of keeping track of these people after they're hired.
Correct.
That was pretty interesting to me, and that's something very unique, and it's very simple, and maybe not even that costly to do, right? To simply go through these background checks. We tend to think of bureaucracy as a barrier for growth and for profit, and we see it as a bad thing. No, it's a bureaucracy always has a bad view on the company in general. And I tend to think of this controls process that you're talking about, that we defraud people as a form of bureaucracy in the company. But you also said that we don't need to have a very costly process to make us defraud certain schemes, such as the phone example you gave us recently. I wanted to explore a little bit. What is this a view of bureaucracy, and how can we make it cheaper for companies to establish these controls, especially if you're not a big company?
A bureaucracy exists for a reason. And sometimes they're very efficient ones. Sometimes they're ones that are very inefficient. And something designed for a company with 2,000 employees is inappropriate to a company that has 20 employees.
Yes.
We were talking about a compliance manual and how big it should be. I said, well, if you own your own food cart, I don't think you need to worry about employee handbooks and things like that.
Yeah.
But, when you start getting up to 15 or 20, you're running a couple of food trucks, you want to make sure that there's a dress code, there's sanitation, there's proper methods of preparing the food to keep your menus correct. So it begins to grow a little bit and a little bit. The biggest mistake we make in any type of bureaucracy or code of conduct is we first copy it from somewhere else.
Yeah.
I remember working with a bank in Rwanda, and I was going through the compliance manual, and I was just laughing. They said, "Mr. Files, what's so funny?" I said, "It says right in here at all times the bank should be compliant with the laws of the state of Wyoming." Drafted by a big four accounting firm. They just copy, cut, pasted.
Copy pasted.
And I said, "How much did you pay for that?" And they told me, and I said, "Well, here's a letter with this particular page highlighted. You're going to demand a full refund." "Oh, we can't do that." I said, "Okay, give me a title." And they laughed. They said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Give me a title. We'll put it on your letterhead, and I'm going to have it couriered over." Got the refund by the end of the week, which was 3 times what I was paying them. So it was profitable hiring me.
Yeah.
You know, it's best to develop your manual from scratch. And the best way to develop your manual is talk to the people in the different divisions and say, "This is what we have to comply with. How would you do it?"
Yes. Yes.
So you don't have this top down. You have the top coming to you saying, "Hey, we got to comply with this." And you have the bottom coming up going, "This is how we can do it." It's much easier.
Yeah. And you think that the thing that happens with the compliance manuals also happens with contracts, right? We see these huge contracts that we see no meaning on why you see people have all these things on these contracts. And when you stop to think about it, it's this process, right? People are copy and pasting strictly from wherever they got the information first. It was actually, when it was first originally written, maybe it had some meaning, but then as it was pasted everywhere else, it had no meaning. And I feel that's how pointless bureaucracies happen, right?
Yeah, so, you're right. And there's also, and you have to guard against this. This is, I'll call it mischief. That the people in charge of the bureaucracy within a business wants to make it as opaque as possible so that they are the keepers of the knowledge.
Yeah.
And that immediately makes it more and more inefficient.
Yes. So let's take a step back here, Burke.
Sure.
We talked about due diligence, and you're obviously very well versed in the due diligence process and the whole scheme that comes with it. But it's kind of a fancy word, you know, because when I first heard about the term due diligence, I saw it in a book. I was already at my family's business, had never heard about the term. Actually, maybe I have heard, but never really internalized what it meant, actually. But I saw it in a book from the executives from Ambev. It was a book in Portuguese called Sonho Grande, Big Dream, which was it was later the people who acquired Budweiser made a huge company. So these people, when they first acquired the first company ever, as they were in the bank, he said that, "Oh, I made a mistake. I didn't do a due diligence process in this first acquisition." So that term stuck with me, and it's usually related to mergers and acquisitions, right? M&As. When you think about due diligence, you think about M&As and the process that comes with acquiring a company or merging with a company. You have to know what's going on the other company's side. So that's why you do a due diligence. But as I understand, especially talking to you, that due diligence is much richer than that, and it's not only to be done during an M&A process. So I wanted to understand, what is due diligence in fact?
I like to joke and say due diligence is the process of finding out which one is the hound and which one is the rabbit, and it's often a surprise to both. I came to due diligence in an investment and banking environment where I was many, many years ago. And myself and 2 other gentlemen wanted to know, what do we need to know about the companies that we're going to underwrite? Our clients are going to put money into these companies. What do we need to know about them? And really had some great discussions, both practical and theoretical, about what we need to know. And we came down that we needed to know both hard due diligence. Is the business incorporated? What about articles, bylaws? How are they operating? What are the backgrounds of the principals? Are there criminal records of the principal? Did they pay the maintenance fee on their patents? All these different things. Very intense, but also we needed, we'll call it procedural due diligence. And the best way to describe it is we had two companies that came to us at the same time that we both liked a lot. One was going to go and put together a whole bunch of small banks. The other one was in medical technology. We sent out the due diligence questionnaire, and you can find some of those questionnaires still on the International Due Diligence Organization website. You just download them and read them, use them, whatever you want to do. But every time we sent the questionnaires out, we got the call. Oh my gosh, these are horrid. This is 20 pages long. All right, yeah, I got it. And then we'd wait. The medical technology company, the principals behind it, called back later in the day, hey, sorry about what we said on the phone. This is actually really easy. Like, okay, good. And that company was underwritten at 20 cents a share, bought out by the end of the year at 86 cents a share. I know that because I bought as much of the stock at that time that I could get off of my paycheck. The other company was going to buy banks. The material came back to us 3 weeks late, not fully filled out, not notarized, and we sent them back their retainer. And they said, we don't get it. Why are you sending the money back? I said, man, we're declining. The decision was around our boardroom between the three of us. We said, these guys are going to be running banks, which is a very, very complicated, regulated environment. If they can't do these questionnaires, what's the likelihood they're going to get a bank license?
Yeah.
It was
a signaling that they wouldn't be able to get a license because they didn't have their house in order.
Absolutely correct. Roll forward a year later. I'm sorry, 1 year later, then 3 years later. 1 year later, the medical technology company had been bought out. We had two NASD arbitrations that we didn't do our due diligence on either the company or the investor. We won both arbitrations because we had comprehensive information, not only on the company, but on the investor. One of the attorneys that I had defended against, his name was Sheldon Mitchell, called me and said, hey, you're pretty good at this due diligence stuff. What about investigations? As I said, Mr. Mitchell, I'm currently leaving the firm in about 2 minutes. I'll come over to your office and see if I'm any good. Turns out I was good. We took a guy from 35 checking accounts to 186 checking accounts, from being broke to being worth 15 million. And I also got my first death threat.
Wow.
Roll forward 3 years, a news article was sent to me from some people in Texas. The principals of the company that was going to roll up these small banks had raised $30 million, and in 3 years they were unable to acquire a single bank or savings and loan and had to return the money to their investors.
Wow. Amazing.
That's the point of due diligence, is understanding the risks that are involved. The world is not a riskless world. So when they talk about risk minimization, no, it's risk management, and due diligence is about finding those risks. I talk also about the difference between pencils and Porsches. You know what happens if people are stealing pencils from you? You know what you should do?
No.
Just buy more pencils. Having a locked file cabinet and signing receipts for more pencils is nuts. Just buy more pencils. If someone are stealing Porsches from you, well, you've got a problem.
But that's an interesting point there, because I understand if the person, it's a much bigger problem if the person's stealing a Porsche, because it's cost a lot more than pencils.
Exactly.
However, if you think about pencils, people just forget about it and just put it in their pockets. But something a little more.
Is that the story you're going to give the judge? I forgot about it. It was just in my pocket.
Yeah, no, but I mean, you're in the office and you write a pencil and you put it in your pocket. It's a pencil. But to think about people frauding stuff in the company, we're willing to pay the price. Okay, let's spend a little more money and having this little frauds, stopping with these little frauds, than actually tolerating these types of things. So would you say there's a scale, and where at some point it's not just about the cost benefit, but also having a good ethics and integrity in the company? How would you think about that?
It can be a difficult decision. I remember working on an acquisition in San Francisco, and the attorneys were going over the copier leases. I took all of the leases away from them. I said, if the acquisition goes through, it's $35 million. The entire cost of all the copiers is $20,000. It's not a rounding error. Don't bother with it. But what if they demand payment up front? The company either pays for the copiers or the copier company takes them back. Who cares? I'm sure they charged me for it somewhere else. I had another complaint for Mr. Burke being Mr. Files being difficult. The other was a company that was purchased by a client, and he'd always send me in to do the first round of due diligence. And it was funny, is he goes, how thick is the employee manual? That's always the first thing he wanted to know. How thick is it? If it's under 25 pages, he said, well, it's probably pretty well managed. You know, when you start getting to 50, 60, 75, he just thought that was just rich because he knew they were being managed by exception and he could get much better results out of the company. You were talking about bureaucracy earlier.
Yes.
So it was a good 75 pager. We went in. And the next thing we did is we scrubbed all of the accounts for fraud. And we found quite a bit, actually. One was a gentleman who had stolen over $100,000. His job was to okay purchase orders and reconcile. And it was quite a tragedy. His son had an operation to repair a hole in his heart, and he decided to steal the money to have the operation. And as the old owner said, I would have given it to him. You know, but
yeah,
he stole it. Another man, and there's no way not to put this. He padded his expense account so his wife could have her chest enlarged.
Wow.
Yeah, it's you know, I was going to say padding the expense account, but that's just too bad. And the last was one of his salesmen, the chief salesman. His expenses were through the roof. And I was auditing his expenses, and there was no error. But on the other hand, the plastics that he was selling, he was getting full rate for them, no discounts applied. He was taking people to ball games, really expensive golf, really nice dinners at some places I know that are very nice. And essentially what he was doing is he was bribing the purchase agents with entertainment for them to just buy at the highest price.
Wow.
The question is ultimate integrity. I think it is impossible to pursue ultimate integrity. However, when you see something like that, you have to ask why. Not only ask yourself why, but ask that person why.
Yeah.
We had a bank that had a bunch of accounts that just wouldn't pass the Know Your Client intake rules.
Yeah.
And what was happening is the new accounts person would open up an account. It'd go to the compliance person. The compliance person said, great, you've got, of the 10 things we need, you've got 7. Can you get the other 3?
Yeah.
And they'd go, you know, typical salesperson, I don't want to do that. And when the compliance person went to lunch, they'd run to the manager, the bank manager, and of course the bank manager signed off on it because the bank manager was bonused on the amount of new deposits, and the account opening person was bonused on how many new accounts they opened. So they're just going right around compliance to get their bonus.
Yeah.
So we made one change in the rules. Those accounts opened that are compliant and signed off by the compliance officer count to your bonuses. The other ones don't.
There you go.
Yeah.
So
We're human beings. We're not saints.
you touched on two interesting topics there. The first one where there is no ultimate integrity,
Mm-hmm.
and when we think about integrity and we put that in our the values of the company, this is what we stand for, but you're right in a certain point. We tell there's a great book by Tyler Cowen
Mm-hmm.
called Stubborn Attachments,
Mm-hmm.
where he talks about how there is no really black and white issues in when you're examining any philosophy, and integrity is one of them, right? We're gonna tell certain good lies to people sometimes, um, uh, you wouldn't want to tell your wife that she doesn't look good in any given day, even though you think that, but you just don't do that type of stuff.
I made that
And
mistake once with my mother when she was trying dresses.
so you,
It went poorly.
you can't have the ultimate integrity all the time, and that happens in the company. I had the example of the pencil, right? You
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you put the pencil in your pocket and you forgot about it, and well, maybe you don't, maybe you didn't, maybe you really wanted to put the pencil there, but it's not really a big deal, you stole a pen. On the other hand, um, incentives also matter when we're thinking about how much integrity a person has, and even though it comes to the character, and a character makes a lot of difference, it may make the incentives that the company puts, or even the how the company culture is structured, also can make a difference, right, Burke? So
It's very important. And in fact, um, part of what I believe led to the 2007-2008 meltdown here in the United States had to do with the change in the way they made mortgage loans. In the past, you, Edson, would underwrite a mortgage. You worked with the bank because it was a loan to hold. You, the bank, were holding that mortgage. And if your mortgages started going bad after 2-3 years, I don't think the bank managers would look upon you very favorably, right?
yeah, yeah,
Gotcha. So now it's loan to sell. You say to yourself, I got 60 days of liability. I'm going to bag these loans down through here like something through a goose. I'm going to
yeah,
make sure I make my bonuses and the rest. And what happened is that incentive structure stayed the same when the market changed. Loan to hold, you were bonused on the size of the loan
yeah,
and how many loans you made. Now you go loan to sell, you're bonused on the size of the loan and how many you made. But you've just eliminated a mitigating.
the
You
risk.
yeah, you've got less skin in the game.
Yeah,
Instead of having to be good for
you
3,
don't
4,
care
5
about the
years,
risk.
it's 60 days.
Yeah,
So the skin in the game has been removed. And once you remove skin in the game, that feedback mechanism of personal harm, whether it be physical or financial, a lot of things go bad.
yes, definitely. And we saw that in that movie, The Big Short,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where they would the brokers would go around selling that thing like crazy, and they would never even consider the risk of having a default in any of those mortgage contracts. And
Oh,
we
because
saw
they were insured. And as soon as they're insured, all concept of due diligence goes off because there's no more risk because they're insured.
yes, so that's another great one. So Burke, I wanted to ask you, like, as a Brazilian, um, we tend to think, and that's something that it's a general thought, that Brazilians are so corrupt, and maybe it's a Brazilian thing, an Italian thing, or uh, a Latin American, but when we think about Americans, like, oh, they're not as corrupt as Brazil. Maybe they has a little more corruption there, but it's not. But when we stop to think about it, maybe it doesn't come down much to like what country you're from or how is your culture, but like to the character of the person or the circumstances that they're put. I wanted to ask you about what are your thoughts on this culture thing? Do you think um, countries like Brazil are inherently more corrupt, or what are your thoughts on that?
A country cannot be corrupt. Only people can be corrupt. And to be corrupt is a choice. Um, I've worked in, I visited 107 countries. I've worked investigations in over 135. I also volunteer as a president of the American Anti-Corruption Institute. We've launched a chapter in Nigeria, a couple of countries in East Africa, Middle East. I go where the corruption is.
Yes.
And what you find is the more difficult it is to navigate the economy and the law, the more corruption there is.
Okay.
Brilliant Latin American economist, Hernando de Soto.
Yes.
And if you haven't read his works, read The Other Path, which was his response to The Shining Path in Peru, as well as Why Capitalism Succeeds in the West and Fails Elsewhere.
The mystery of capital, I think that's
Yes, yes, correct. And he did a study in Peru. It took 11 permits and about $175 to get the 11 permits to open a tailor shop. And that was more than the annual average income.
Yes.
And even after they went through with his students to get the permits for a tailor shop, the inspectors kept coming by and asking for, la mordita.
Yes, yes, yes. We know exactly how that goes in Brazil.
Yeah. So you then take a look at laws to facilitate corruption. And when you make a system overly complex and difficult,
yes,
that opens it up to corruption.
Yes.
In Russia, it's over 120 permits required to drill for oil. So that's over 120 contact points. You look at some of these different events, some corruption is just there to get around the corners, to get around the rough corners of any type of legislation or rules or regulations, and others there just to completely fix things.
Yes.
Such as what we saw in Bell City, California, or in the city of Detroit. Absolutely, abjectly, totally corrupt.
Yes.
Beyond redemption. And I liked it when they sentenced Kwame Kilpatrick, the former mayor of Detroit. The judge said, "You're not a mayor. You are the head of a large criminal organization." Corruption is a human condition and has been with us throughout the ages.
Yeah.
It didn't start with 30 pieces of silver 2019 years ago.
Yeah.
Or 2020 years ago. You just have to make sure that the environment in which you're operating is corruption resistant.
Yes.
How do you do that? You reduce the amount of laws and prescriptions and proscriptions. You introduce personal responsibility, and you pay adult wages.
Yes.
And I'm serious. When you're paying the tax collector in the Philippines $60 a month and people are fighting for that job, give me a break. It's not a question of if you're corrupt as a tax collector. It's to what degree.
Exactly.
Judges in the highest court in Algeria make $1,250 a month. And I remember in one meeting in Morocco, the Algerian judge says, "I'm not corrupt. I have my clerks handle the money." Talk about cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
So corruption is a natural extent of people wanting to do well and get more and work around the rules.
Yeah. Any company in Brazil, including ours, would have to deal with excessive bureaucracy with anything we had to do. Say a simple thing like, okay, we have to update the bylaws of our company. Mm-hmm. Right? We have a bylaw, now we have a new bylaw coming in for whatever reason. And this process is so demanding. Like you have to bring your doc. It's getting better, right? They're bringing it digitally back, but until a while back, you have to sign the document, bring it to a person that's gonna check it in some government department, and then that person is going to say, okay, there's a comma that's wrong, go back, you can't do that. And then, okay, you fix the comma, come back, and then, oh, now it's 30 days until it's fixed. Oh, there's something, oh, there's an error in the system where actually at some point someone put another uh, person in your company. It's all wrong. And then you have to go through this process, and you know that, look, if I just simply pay that person like 500 reais, which is really really cheap if you compare to the whole hassle you're going through, and the hours of your accountant and everybody that's involved in the process, it's gonna go through. It's much cheaper if you just simply bribe the person, and he wants to receive that bribe. That's why he's causing that difficulty, and that's why this whole system is built this way. And like so sometimes it's much more efficient. Let's just do the corruption, and we get this over with. So it's the environment that the bureaucratic environment that we're talking about that causes this. And
I call it legislation for facilitation.
exactly. We have a saying here in Brazil is you create the difficulty to sell the facilitation.
And yes, you create the disease so you can sell the cure.
Exactly, create the disease so you can sell the cure.
I remember talking to a Zambian border guard on the border of Zimbabwe and Zambia. For some reason, I stuck out. I was chatting with them, and I was having more fun. My minders from Zimbabwe were also having a great deal of fun. But I was chatting with this lady, and I said, so what is your tariff system here for goods and people coming across the border? And she pulled out a sheet, and it was very comprehensive. And I said, cash only. She said, yes. I said, what about Zimbabwe dollars? Do you take those? Oh, honey, no, we don't take those. No one takes those. Not even Zimbabweans take them. We like Kenyan shillings. We'll take South African rand, but we prefer pounds, euros, or our favorite dollars. So I was chatting with her. We're both having a Diet Coke at a bench. And I said, so what if the government was going to pay you $50,000 a year for you to administer the program? She said, oh, honey, I'm not taking a pay cut. And if I send that money in, if I send that money into Lusaka, those bureaucrats will steal it, and I'll never see my check. No, honey, it works just fine right now. We keep out the drugs and the bad things, and we charge our toll, and we keep a good border station. I said, so how much for the drugs, honey? She looks at me. She goes, not on my watch. Okay, ma'am. So there was, it was a light conversation about a serious subject. But here you have another problem. You have a bureaucrat that doesn't trust their government to pay them. So they're now out on their own. Yeah. They've been given a license to collect, and they are. Yeah. So if you want to begin the process of eliminating corruption, you have to begin the process of reducing compliance laws, but increasing skin in the game. And it will take care of itself. Absent that active role, typically what happens is either the country collapses, and you have a new government come in, or it's taken over. And you just hope that the military take over, that the new rulers are less corrupt than the old ones.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I heard in a group that was in charge of a country was very corrupt. And another group came to challenge them. And they voted for the new group. They said, they've got to be better. No, they were just different. They weren't any better.
We see that all the time.
Because the laws remain the same.
Yeah. It's not the people, it's the rules of the game, right? As long as you have the same rules of the game, you're going to have the same incentives, and the bad people are always going to come and take the control of the country.
Correct.
We talked about here how an excessive bureaucracy is also a problem, right, in the controls. And I believe that this is also applicable to the company, right? If the company established certain controls and it simply did whatever, copy pasted from other companies and created a huge bureaucracy, it would also create incentives for people to go do wrong things inside the company, right? So would you say that?
There's what's called the fraud triangle. Opportunity, pressure, rationalization. The company only controls opportunity, and that's through your checks and balances. The pressure is the thought that a rational man would have to have a pressure to steal, like the person stealing for this child's operation. And the rationalization, well, I work hard, I deserve this, which was one of the things we heard from the woman at the medical practice that later threw a drink at my head, is that she deserved it because she worked hard. Well, she was getting more money illegally than the doctors. We look at that fraud triangle, but I want to put in that there's another one in there, and that some people steal because they like the game. They like the thrill.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible to guard yourself from those people. Now, with the advent of technology, there are psychological tests that you can have your potential employees take online, as well as some as well as some other interview services and the rest, at least give you an idea of where this person may fall on the criminal spectrum.
Yeah.
But this goes again, your number one risk are your employees. Yeah. 80% of all fraud on a company calls occurs from inside. When you go to one of the convenience markets, they 7-Eleven or Circle K, they all have 11 cameras. 7 of the 11 cameras are in the inside looking at the cashiers and the stock people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there a certain type of pattern in the types of frauds you see? So if so, what would you say are the most common type of frauds in any given company?
The most common frauds are theft of money. Okay. One way or another, theft of goods and or services. Those are the most common. Typically, somewhere around $30,000 to $60,000 of things missing is about the average threshold for when they're discovered.
Does it involve like real cash, or is it more like a digital transfer?
All of those work.
All of it.
Yeah, we had a family of restaurants here in town. They had 22 restaurants and 700 employees. Unfortunately, only 500 of them were real people.
Wow.
Yeah, so 200 ghost employees. They wondered why they were having a problem.
Wow, 200 ghost employees in the company.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And in fact, they were what triggered it is our firm was hired to do a pre-sale due diligence, to see what an acquiring company, what questions they would ask, and for us to ask that of the question. So if we find problems, they can address it. Well, I found one employee that was working 180 hours a week at the different restaurants. Like, what happens is the fraudsters got sloppy. They got tired of inventing new names. They just figured they'd use her a couple more times.
And that was in the U.S.
Yeah.
See, that's actually surprising for us how things like this also happen in the U.S.,
Happen all over the world, man. All over the world. Where there's an opportunity, there's a finger in it.
Yes.
So, the good news is we did the pre-acquisition due diligence. We improved the profitability of the restaurants by 28%. It took a few months. And we got that done. The area that you also have to look out for is then in the C-suite. The C-suite isn't going to steal cash or something like that. The C-suite is typically some type of document fraud. Okay. Appraisals, opinions, income statements, balance sheets, acquisitions. There's typically some type of document fraud, and the average that a C-suite executive will get is somewhere around $600,000.
Wow.
We keep looking at the low-level employees, but the higher-level employees have a better understanding of the business, have more access and more power, so they take more.
Yes. At some point in the company growth, the company owner, right, or its partners have to delegate their powers to the director, some director or who's going to take care of our bank accounts, how do we know if they're not just doing stuff with the money? So it's a very interesting, because you have to grow at some point. So if you want to be a profitable company, you have to grow, but at the same time you have to delegate the powers and trust that someone is going to do the work for you. But what's
I
interesting is that,
wouldn't trust, I would verify. That's the part of of
yes,
controls.
that's what I wanted to get at, because that people, when they're delegating, and that goes for any business, right? And that I think that believe that's a very good point, that if you're delegating something, you don't necessarily have to trust the person. I guess you always have to start. Wait, a good common ground is if you're hiring someone to be your director, you obviously trust that person, but you don't have to necessarily just trust him blindly, right? And
Trust but verify. You hire people, you select people, you talk to those people, you learn about them, and you hire them because you do have a feeling of comfort. I'm not going to use the word trust. Comfort with their
yes,
ability. But they almost also must be held accountable. And you have to have a system of checks and balances, whatever it may be, to accountable. Many years ago, a popular children's toy was manufactured in China and shipped all over the world. I mean, it was really cool. I got one myself for my kids.
okay.
And then I learned that it could possibly have lead paint. I'm like, okay, that's not good. I bought a lead test kit. It was $6 and gave me, I'm sorry, it was $4 and gave me 6 tests. All I did is I took a Q-tip, the little cotton swab, and I dipped it in a liquid, and then I rubbed the paint on the toy. And if the swab turned red, it had lead paint. Well, the swab turned red. But here we have a major distributor of toys worldwide who didn't spend less than $1 to spot check some toys. And here they're looking at, tens of millions of dollars of toys that have to be recalled and destroyed. The recall is just problem one. Then you have the destruction. What do you do with it? So it's important to hire people that you do trust and to buy products from people that you do trust. But you also have to verify, because somewhere in the chain, something could be overlooked. Something could go sideways.
Yes. And the message goes, it's nothing against you. It's just the process that we built in the company. It's just our routines. It's just best practices, right?
I wouldn't even apologize.
You don't take it personally, right?
I don't care whether you take it personally or not. These are the rules.
These are the rules, right?
Yeah.
This is how we do business. It's the way it is.
We're adults now. Not only are we responsible for ourselves, but we're responsible to you, and we have no problem with you checking in on us.
Yes. And a good reaction to the other side is, look, no, I believe in what you're doing, and I'm going to help you do all these processes, and I'm going to comply. So I think that's perfect reaction.
When I worked at the broker-dealer, we had weekly financial reports that had to go into the government. We had our computers that were checked every week for bugs and all sorts of other stuff. And every single call, and this is before email, every single call was recorded.
Okay.
And no problem with it.
Perfect.
Those were the rules of the game.
Coming back here, Burke, to the level of the country again, we have a major investigation process going on in Brazil since 2014, which is called Lava Jato, and it's in English probably the translation is the laundry
Car wash
operation, and it's been a big deal in Brazil. These guys have defrauded the biggest corporations, and we knew there was some level of corruption in these companies, but we had no idea how deeply this thing was within the biggest companies of Brazil, within the state, and all the politicians involved, and everything that's been going on. And I was very optimistic in the beginning when I saw that. It's like, wow, now we're catching these big guys. Now everybody, we're gonna put the country in order, and everything is gonna go back in place. But things went through. Even we got a former president in jail now. Lula's in jail, and all these people. The Marcelo Odebrecht, which is the one of the biggest guys, was also in jail, who was a big major businessman in Brazil. So we're like, okay, now things are gonna get better, right? We're gonna be a less corrupt country. We're gonna move to the right direction. And I have the feeling, well, maybe people are a little more hesitant to corruption now, but we still see a lot of corruption. It's still happening, and the Lava Jato has lost a little bit of the traction that it used to have before. We have another president that got elected with the whole I'm gonna fight corruption discourse, but it's not going exactly like we thought it was gonna go. What are your thoughts on this? Is there a way to reduce corruption, and how do we do that?
Here's what happens when you deal with corruption only by punishment. You've missed the point.
Okay.
You can arrest and punish people who are corrupt, but there were economic incentives in place for them to be corrupt. If you don't address those incentives, the next wave of corruption is going to be more sophisticated and harder to find. They're not going to quit. They're going to get better. But, I used to bid contracts for Asian Development Bank. I loved working with them. But I found that it cost me, X amount of dollars to bid. I got 1 out of 5 bids, and when I got that 5th bid, it more or less covered not only my cost of the other bids, but the work I did. So it was a break even. Why bother? Seriously, why bother?
Yeah.
Sometimes the cost of bidding is so high that it makes sense to use corruption as the fix for the risk.
Yes.
You're bidding on building a bridge or a highway, and your bid's going to cost you, a couple of $100,000 to put together.
Yes.
So
just the
what's
paperwork.
what's another $50,000 to make sure that you're the one?
Exactly.
And I don't have to write you a check, Edson. I want to thank you for approving my bridge. I think it shows great taste, and you're very wise in approving my bridge. You'll be getting some speaking fees. You'll be going overseas, staying in nice hotels, and getting speaking fees for your work, talking about contracting. And when your children are of age, I'll assure you that they will get a scholarship in their school of your choice. Find the money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you have it.
Find the money. Mm-hmm.
And what would you say? There's if you were in charge of the law, right?
That would be a mistake.
Okay, yeah. Well, let's say that you have a very efficient way of influencing a certain law to happen, right? You don't need to be the dictator. What is the one law you would put in place that would disincentivize corruption to happen, or would you take away some laws, or?
It would be a combination of things. I would shrink the amount of laws that businesses have to comply to, but increase their responsibility.
Okay.
I would decrease the number of government bureaucrats, but I would increase their pay substantially. But there's a proviso in there that if at any time they're found to be corrupt or taking payments, they will lose their retirement, they will lose their benefits, they will lose their health care, the government-sponsored health care. You've got them with golden handcuffs. And when people say, oh my gosh, look how much a politician earns.
Yes.
I think they're not paid enough. Pay them a couple of $100,000 a year. That way they're not incentivized to take the side cash.
Yes. Maybe we can have less politicians, less public employees, but better paid public employees, so that they are hold accountable for it, right? There's a big risk of losing that job. It costs them a lot.
Absolutely. One of the countries proposed, and they got some of it through, was Singapore. Was they noticed that there was a problem with corruption, and Lee Kuan Yew purged some, but then he brought back a very large salary for the elected officials as well as the bureaucrats. And they got a housing subsidy, half of the interest on a mortgage the government would pay for them. They had the use of private cars, reduced cost airfare, all sorts of things. And that if they lost their job because of theft or corruption, they'd lose more than just the job. They would lose their way of life. They would lose everything. So that level of responsibility should be well compensated. And if they're to betray the country, that they also betray themselves and their family, and they pay the penalty. It goes against the grain of current legislative wisdom in most places.
Yeah.
And it's not Brazil, it's most countries, I'd say 90%.
Yeah, but even when we think about the more classical libertarian type of arguments, like at least here in Brazil, we always see the government officials and like, oh, these guys are so well paid. It's kind of counterintuitive what you just said, because they actually have higher salaries, and what you're saying is, look, maybe the people in charge of the money and the government accounts, and maybe these people should be better paid, so that they could be more accountable to their jobs. And if they get caught on some corruption, then they have a lot to lose. Right? That's something very counterintuitive. Maybe it would be a scheme where the incentives would be more aligned, and it would be more efficient, and you'd probably have a better setting overall, right?
So I think so. I mean, you're incentivizing individuals to be professional and responsible.
Yeah. And maybe that's why CEOs are so well paid. It makes sense. Right? You give them a big salary, and if they're corrupt, they lose a lot. They have a lot to lose.
Yeah. And if a CEO is corrupt, he'll not only lose his job, his shares, the public will demand that he goes to jail. And you're seeing that happen in Brazil.
Exactly. He has a lot to lose. So that's why it makes sense to pay higher pay CEO. Maybe it's not just the skills, but it's just where this guy stands. There's a lot that goes to it, and it makes sense to pay him because their incentives are put in the right place.
Correct.
Burke, it was a very rich conversation here with you. Do you have any concluding remarks, or would like to say something we didn't touch on?
Yeah. And I know I'm biased in saying this, and you'll get a chuckle out of it.
Okay.
But I'd like to see our students better educated in when business doesn't go right.
Yes.
How a very smart, earnest young person can be trapped in corruption, for example. Yes. How corrupt practices work. The use of different things to prevent corruption, to prevent fraud.
Yes.
So when they go out into the world, they're not these naive little lovely bunnies, but they're ready to do business in a hard world. That includes corporate espionage, theft, fraud, lying, deceit, corruption, and be prepared.
Yes, that's a good point. I believe a lot of business education likes to just look at the good side of business, right? As everything, it is good advice. Okay, you have to have leadership. You have to treat people well, and if you treat people well, they're going to treat you back well. But when you go out to the real world, it's pretty rough. It doesn't go everything like in a fairy tale. And I think a point there is, look, there's an ethical way of doing business, and there's an ethical way of making money, and even a lot of money. It doesn't matter doesn't matter how much money you do. You can make a lot of money honestly and make a good business out of it. And it, but there's also a corrupt way of doing things, and there's a fine line between that. And people just have to have their eyes open, and also understand that there's also going to be a lot of corrupt people out there. They're not going to do business the ethical way, and be prepared to deal with that. That's a very important thing.
You have to be prepared, because I've seen many very earnest, bright young men and women lose their way.
Okay, yeah.
And it wasn't in your face with a gun saying, do this or else. I mean, then you get there's something wrong. They were slowly manipulated into losing their innocence, and then they're trapped. I've got you. Edson, if your business says you can only accept gifts from one person up to $100 per year, well, I've got you. I've got you.
Yes.
We go out, we have a little meal, we laugh, I take care of the check. A couple of weeks later, I give you a copy of my book at $68. I'm 68% of the way there.
Yes.
We go out to a sporting event or do sailing or fishing. And now I say, Edson, I want you to do this, that, and the other for me. And you go, well, I can't do that. I go, Edson, I'm sorry you're going to do that, because I now have you accepting gifts from me well over the threshold for your business. So you either do for me what I've asked you, or I'll just tell your employer and you'll be terminated.
So there you go.
I got you.
Blackmailed.
I like to think about it as more of an incentive program in my favor.
Yep. Exactly. So people have to be prepared to deal with that kind of stuff, because maybe the person that's approaching you with an incentive program, like you're saying, is someone you look up to. And this guy is a successful businessman. I want to be like him one day. And you don't know if he's a corrupt or not. They didn't come with a stamp in their foreheads, right? Oh, this guy is a corrupt guy. This guy is not.
They don't have the C,
No. So you don't know. I mean, sometimes you look up to that guy, and you just don't notice it until you're already deeply into it. Like just the example you just said, Burke. So I believe also that's something very important. I think there's a space for education to at least show some of that, right? A lot of what we do in education cannot be translated in a good way to real practice. Like there's some things you can only learn in a job, and that's so true. But at the same time, you don't have to reinvent the wheel in your job. You can learn a lot of stuff in education that you can bring to your job, and a lot of it is how to deal with corruption. And I believe this is something that students really have to understand.
Yeah, I mean, fraud, theft, corruption, espionage, all those wonderful things. What I call them, the business pack of mischief.
Yes. So Burke, thank you so much for being our guest today, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks for listening to Profit Talks. Now, do you have any comment or other business-related question? If so, please send us, and we'll be glad to explore it in future episodes. Also, be sure to subscribe and share with your friends. We are on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and many others.